But we do know that judges do get to say whether the executive is complying with the law or not. That's been the case for decades, hundreds of years.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying whether you're complying with the law and then you have these individual district court judges setting effectively broad federal policy that is specifically reserved for the President of the United States. I think we do have a constitutional crisis, and it's being caused by these judges. They're not here to tell us. They're not here to tell us how to spend the money. They're not here to set broad federal policy. That is the president's job as elected by the people. These judges are supposed to be settling discrete, specific matters, not policy setting. I think Vance is right. I think Trump has a point. And these judges want nothing more to continue the lawfare against Trump.
I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to hear that you think Trump is right.
They're doing this on purpose.
However, just on a real important technical point here, one of the main disputes is whether the executive branch can just decide not to spend money that another co-equal branch has said ought to be spent. So it's not just about forcing the federal government to spend money. It's saying Congress said you need to spend this money this way, and the executive branch saying, no, I don't feel like it, and the courts say you have to comply.
Well, my answer to that simply is, it is the executive branch's job to figure out how to spend money once it is appropriated by Congress. And sometimes they spend money that's not been appropriated. But the correct political control is between the executive and the Congress, not some random
I want to return to that because that is also a major legal question.
Do you really think that J.D. Vance's tweet is only about these district judges?
I think
this is a slippery slope because they're going to move on to what the next ruling is. They're setting the stage so that they can say that the executive branch has control now over the judicial branch. They're setting the stage.
No,
and for people who think that President Trump has not planned all of this, he pushes the envelope constantly. There was January 6th. He has a myriad of people out there that would support the executive branch being able to rule over the judicial branch because there have been no repercussions. And when there are not consequences and when there are not repercussions, you get away with it.
I get it. You want individual federal judges who hate Donald Trump to tie him up for 4 years.
No, I don't.
If you want a big policy questions decided, let the Supreme Court do it. But in the interim, the executive has to be allowed to govern.
How do we get to the Supreme Court? Can
Just
somebody tell me?
And that's fine. But you can't tie him up
we get
until
to the
it gets
Supreme
there.
Court.
You can't tie him up
we
until
get to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court by the judges ruling, things going to appeal, and then it goes up.
And in the meantime, what happens? Trump can't act? Trump can't act?
In the meantime, you're supposed to comply with the court's rulings. Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're supposed to comply, but Scott's absolutely right in that the court cannot say you have to spend these dollars today. So as a governor, I dealt with this. We got things challenged in state court and federal court. It's all judge-shopped, by the way. Judges don't randomly get these cases. There's a reason that these cases are filed in Boston, the Boston court, or a certain district, Rhode Island, because they know they're going to get a judge that is politically
That's a great
favorable.
bipartisan practice as well.
Yeah. Both sides do it. I mean, I think
how many times that district court and judge one guy in Texas shut down Joe Biden?
But you raised the right point. Should the president, the singular president, should he have to share the presidency with 300 district court judges? No, absolutely not.
But the point, though, you made a really good point that there have been judges that shut down some of President Biden's executive actions, and they understand, the Biden administration understood the checks and balances.
The Supreme Court tried to stop me, but they never will.
But not in the way that Donald Trump is.
Who said that? Who said that? Yeah,
Joe
Biden.
Yeah,
but
Donald Scott, he actually didn't ignore it.
He did. Right. They continued to plow forward with student aid.
No, he didn't.
Let me set the record.
He actually got dinged on the student loan
hated the student loan forgiveness policy.
What did he say out loud?
I thought it was a ridiculous policy. I thought it was unconstitutional. I predicted it would get struck down. It did get struck down, and I applauded. He did not ignore it, though. He went and tried under a different law.
So he ignored it.
You're allowed. No,
that's not ignoring it.
That's
not ignoring it.
It's trying to do it. But let me just understand where you stand. If a district court judge rules in a way that the president dislikes, should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it. There's a difference between broad policy decisions and discrete disputes between parties. That's the difference. If I want a policy decided, I'll take it to the Supreme Court.
But what about checks and balances?
Well, Scott, you're
of a district court judge who elected them.
What I can't get with is you talking in these bizarre, broad generalities.
It's not bizarre.
Every single one of these cases deals with a discrete issue, okay? It deals with funding. It deals with with certain constitutionally or statutorily appointed roles. Every single one of these things is a distinct thing, and they're all being dealt with by different judges. So it's not broad swaths of policy here. When the court says Congress, appropriated this money, you must unfreeze it while we litigate this. Why can't Trump comply with that?
So you're saying that a judge should decide how and when money is spent
a judge is saying,
for years, and not the president of the United
Scott,
States?
Let me explain
You're a governor,
a little bit more. Let me explain it a little bit more slowly. A judge is saying,
you don't have to talk to me like that.
Congress.
I have a position on this, and you have an opinion. We can disagree.
Yeah, but I'm saying you listen to me because you're not listening, and you're making claims that are not connected to the facts. The judge is saying,
maybe you are.
Congress appropriated a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
We need to litigate this.
Okay.
While we litigate this, we're going to put a hold on the actions that you took that might be unconstitutional.
So while we litigate
this,
I'm a judge and I'm in charge of the executive branch and you're not, forget it. I totally disagree.
You just can't compel the executive branch to spend the dollars. You can't do that. They can't say we're going to start, the judges are going to start writing the checks. They have every right to
have you heard of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974?
No.
Okay, well, let me play this. Let me play
By the
this.
way, none of your viewers have
Okay,
either.
well, I'm gonna play this clip for you. This is in Congress. Russ Vought, who is the architect of a lot of this, was being questioned in Congress about the Impoundment Control Act, which actually says that the executive branch should spend the money how Congress appropriated it. Here's what he said is going on right now in the federal government.
Do you believe the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the law of the land that you must follow?
It is the law of the land. As you know, the president has run on that issue. He believes it's unconstitutional. For 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than an appropriation if they could do it for less. And we have seen the extent to which this law has contributed to waste, fraud, and abuse.
So, Ellie, this is the law of the land. They might be wanting to challenge it, but it is the law.
Right. The Impoundment Control Act says essentially the president cannot block money allocated by Congress. To the power of district court judges, and I understand your point, Scott. I understand the frustration people have when a district court judge blocks a broad mandate from the chief executive, the elected chief executive. Ultimately, the big issues go up to the Supreme Court. But I guess I would ask both of you, what if a district court judge had blocked Barack Obama's DACA plan, the Dreamers plan, right? And he said, heck with you, I'm doing it anyway. Would you be okay with that, or would you have a problem with that?
No,
would that be okay?
So again, that's where we're forgetting a key piece of the third branch of government. That's where Congress steps in.
Yes.
Right? You have to remember that a judge can't just say, well, I'm going to arbitrarily block something. They say, I'm blocking it because of this, and Congress can step in and be more specific and more refined if they want to.
Well, how does that work with Congress, who's appropriated funds for all of these other agencies?
So it can't work that
way. And now the
Congress
executive branch is
$20
million on Congress.
If Congress appropriates $20 million for a program, do you, as the chief executive, do I have to spend $20 million on that program?
Well, actually, this is why I
Because if I don't, what's the number?
I know that
Why not do a bit of an investigation into it first?
I know that the Impoundment Control Act thing sounds really wonky, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I understand the idea of testing laws. You want to see how far you can go. But the question that you are asking has been answered by the courts, okay? The reason that the Impoundment Control Act exists is to say that when Congress says we appropriate this money, it should be spent that way. That's their power. They have the power of the
Every
purse.
state in the country, when we pass a balanced budget, and I'll explain what a balanced budget is
Again,
to everyone
it's
in Washington
a dispute,
in a minute.
but I'm saying
this
that hasn't
lapse.
been proven
There's
in
hundreds of millions of dollars in New Hampshire that intentionally do not get spent on certain programs.
What about
when
the Trump administration says to Congress, you created this agency, we're going to just decide it doesn't exist anymore?
He runs the executive branch. He can decide who works for the executive branch.
Where does this end? So Congress creates an agency. The executive says, to heck with it. Congress appropriates money. The executive branch says, to heck with it. Where does this end?
So it ends. You can go back, and I like what they're doing, and they're going to whiteboard these programs out, and they're going to force each of these departments to come back and actually justify their existence, which no one in Washington has done for decades. If you want NIH money to go forward, explain to me why, how, and how it's going to be spent.
All right, so the next Democratic president who says ICE is going to just disappear, I expect that the two of you will say that sounds
good. We're
trying to change the entire nature of the U.S. economy. We haven't had an economy that, frankly, for about the last half century, has been all about lowering prices and raising lowering prices for consumers, raising stock prices, right? We have a kind of a financialized economy. We're trying to shift to more of a production-based economy because of things like COVID, the war in Ukraine, conflict around the world. It's taught us that it's good to make things as well as to buy things, right? But this is a complicated process. It doesn't happen overnight. This is really like a 5-10 year process.
Well, I think that's all fine, that it's a 5-10 year process, that both presidents, President Biden and President Trump, actually think that we need to figure out a new system. But you said something that I wanted to pick up on, this part about low-income families, about elderly families, about people who are struggling to make ends meet. This whole conversation about how we have to feel some pain at first. Those families cannot afford to feel pain. They are literally one paycheck away from losing everything that they have. And some of them voted for Donald Trump so that they could find relief. And these tariffs are going to make it even harder for them to find relief. It's going to make it even harder for them to pay their bills, to make sure their children have food on their table, to make sure that they have what they need to go to school. And so what about those people that are depending on this president, whether they voted on him or not, because he has to govern for all Americans? What about those people who are not privileged enough to have to deal with price inflation like those of us around this table?
A couple of things. Number one, glad to hear some acknowledgement of the pain that was inflicted on people over the last 4 years.
No. I said the pain that these tariffs are going to cause on the American people.
But you said they're already in pain. Where'd that pain come from?
No, that pain came from Donald Trump's first presidency.
What happened in the intervening period?
That President Biden actually had to fix the economy on. You know that's true.
Here's the deal on these steel tariffs. You're exactly right. It's all about China. They make steel. They also have cutouts all over the world.
But they're not subject to these 25% tariffs.
This
is Canada and Mexico.
Well, there's going to be unilateral 25% tariffs. Tariffs are a blunt instrument, right? They are going to hit allies and adversaries alike. But the steel market is global, right? And so China has been, for the last 20 years or so, producing a lot of cheap steel. If it doesn't go into the U.S., it goes into other markets. By the way, this is a problem in other areas: electric vehicles, clean tech, lithium batteries. I mean, right now, there's a lot of tension because no country, be it a European country, the U.S., wants to be the place where China dumps the cheap stuff, and that's why we're in the situation we are.
And China using indirect cutouts around the world, unfinished products, loopholes that popped up during the Biden administration. It all helps China. So my view is this is aimed squarely at trying to control China's influence over what is a really important industry, not just economically, but also for national security purposes. We have to make steel. This stuff goes into military vehicles and all kinds of stuff. So there's the economy we have to talk about, but there's a national security implication to allowing China to control the world steel market. We have to control it. It's in our national security interest.
One other thing that's happening is all the Doge cuts are going on, and some Republican lawmakers are realizing that it affects them and their states. One of them is Katie Britt, who is speaking out against Alabama institutions that are not going to be getting NIH funding. She says that she wants a smart, targeted approach in order to save jobs in her state. We're going to start seeing a lot more of this.
And this is what I was saying in the commercial break, that why didn't they break out the whiteboard before they pulled all the funding and say, you have 4 weeks to come to us and tell us what's your most important spending, because we are going to be making cuts, which I think most Americans agree with. But instead, they just went in with the bulldozer. And that's why you're seeing all of these repercussions now, including Republicans who are not going to.
But again,
the NIH...
They're not whiteboarding this. The NIH funds have been massively abused. Up to 50% go to overhead and administrative costs to these universities. That should be, they're saying we're going to cap that at 15%, like most other government contracts.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, and I suspect that some of the people in the state of New Hampshire would be affected by things like this. But
a bunch of overpaid academics that have been abusing the system.
Oh, wait, hold on just a second. What I'm talking about is medical research, which is what these things fund. And I think Katie Britt is talking about this too. There's a concern that just broadly cutting is going to basically stop the creation of medical research
is worried
all
about
across the country.
A bunch of professors getting fired. What this is saying is, for the $1 million we're going to give you, $850,000 actually has to be spent on that medical research,
so
the product, not
50%
of it on salaries.
You're not concerned that this is going to have an impact on cancer research, on medical trials?
No, theoretically, more dollars go to cancer research and less to go to the professors. Overhead.
Theoretically, but people who know how these things work say that's not what's going to happen.
Because it's their job.
Because they're the ones abusing it right now.
The university system has abused the American public and this grant system for ages.
Look, I think Gretchen's got a point here. Everybody wants cuts. Everybody knows government can be made more efficient. But the administration isn't helping itself by coming in and doing things that, I mean, if you look at Article 1 of the Constitution, it says basically you just can't come in and bulldoze entire agencies. Now, USAID was actually not a bad place to start from sort of a PR perspective in some ways, because there's a lot of inefficiency. But then you go on to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Then you go on to, many things that I think a lot of Americans would say are doing a good job. And it's not helping them to do it this way.
Why isn't it helping them?
It's because it's making a lot of people feel that illegal things are happening. Just get out the whiteboard. I agree with that. I think it's.
I don't know.
Well, look,
I don't know. He's got his
say,
highest approval ratings ever as serving as president right now. So I'm just trying to figure out why you think it's not helping.
I'm looking at federal judges. I was hearing you speak beforehand. I'm looking at all the judges that are saying, hey, there's so much illegal stuff happening right now that they're having a hard time even prioritizing it. Ultimately, that undermines faith in government. That undermines faith in how government is
I think undermining faith in government is the point.
I
think that
totally
is exactly
it undermines
what they
faith
want
to change nothing.